So the word sanctuary, from the Latin, sanctus, meaning holy, and atrium, like where we get the word atrium, space. I'm not sure I like the word holy. I think it's a word that's been misused and abused. So I think I'd like to translate that word holy to sacred space. And like I say, when we're talking sanctuary, we're also talking archetype again, right? And when we're talking, I know I've said this a bit, and when we're talking archetypes, we're talking cosmic, but we're talking on every level, aren't we? So that's why I stumbled into this the other day. So when we talk about sanctuary, we talk about, oh, there she is. There. Sanctuary being something we embody, so something that exists between us, within us. And then I'll add the quote of the Irish proverb on your bulletin. It is in the shelter of one another that we live. So what is that talking about? Sanctuary. We talk about buildings as being sanctuary, safe place. We talk about relationships and communities being sanctuary or toxic spaces. And then we have the planet itself, which is a sanctuary for us. And then my favorite, when we go really, really big, that's not really big, I know. My favorite translation of a Welsh word, so the Welsh word for universe is bydysod, and it is translated that which has been baptized. So you see, it's archetypical. Where do you need to have this conversation? So within the Judeo-Christian tradition, the earliest conversations around sanctuary were often tense because think about the people within the Jewish tradition. When you think about their archetypical story of heading out on a journey, seeking to connect with the promised land. How do we know that the mystery is with us? It is a cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. And they carried with them this, what they called this tabernacle, that was, as long as that tabernacle was with them, God was with them, right? It's that old. And I understand deeply our need to attach mystery to something that we can see and touch, and therefore the use of icons and candles, stained glass, etc. But always having to challenge ourselves to say this is just a vehicle and a portal, it is not the mystery itself. So conversations around sanctuary within the Judeo-Christian tradition were always, well, yeah, but God needs a temple. Big arguments around that. So let me talk to you about the other perspective of that, because the other piece of that continued to be the subtext was, no, God doesn't need a temple. God is sanctuary. The mystery is sanctuary. And I think we constantly go back and forth between that tension going, yes, but I need to have a space, I need to have an altar, I need to have a place to come and surrender and prostrate. And we deeply understand that. The problem is when that place becomes, when that place becomes the mystery as opposed to a portal to mystery. So here are some passages from our tradition that speak to the more cosmic nature of sanctuary. And once again, this language is always in poetry and in parable, another sign that it's always bigger than we will want to imagine it. So the Psalms in particular lend language that helps us to glean insights into how that mystery is present among us. You who live in the shelter of the Most High, who abide in the shadow of the Almighty, will say to God, you are my refuge. You are my sanctuary in whom I trust. For God will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness is like a shield, and you will not fear the terror of the night or the arrow that flies by day, or the pestilence that stalks in darkness, or the destruction that wastes at noondays. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up so that you will not dash your foot against the stone. So many of the Psalms that provide that portal to understand God as sanctuary come from a very desert, dry, hot land, and that is not our context most of the time. So here is a responsive psalm that uses our own landscape and weather patterns to invite us into understanding another perspective of sanctuary. This is called a Canadian psalm. Please read the bold. Deep, cold, and ever-present chill. Bless the one who is warmth and light. Delicate frost and slashing sleet. Bless the one who is warmth and light. Rigid ice and gentle snow. Bless the one who is warmth and light. Lingering darkness and scarce light. Bless the one who is warmth and light. Long nights and short days. Bless the one who is warmth and light. Slumbering bear and fleeing goose. Bless the one who is warmth and light. Bare trees and hidden seed. Bless the one who is warmth and light. Bone-chilling wind and snow-covered field. Bless the one who is warmth and light. And then when we get to the testimony of the New Testament, the language shifts yet again. So we have Jesus, who takes everything that people went to for up there and goes, "You're it." So, among his words are, "You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, you let your light shine before others, so that they may see your goodness and give glory to the one who is cosmic light." And finally, just one little verse from Corinthians. So Paul is still trying to work it out. And Paul, in speaking to the Corinthians, is speaking to a community that is trying to understand how to take this renewal of ancient teachings shared with the community by Jesus and put it into practice in their own community. And the Corinthians, the church in Corinth, was like every other group of people, just a lot of power struggles, not always trying to work out their diversity, really, more than anything else. And in the middle of that, I think Paul has some really interesting things to say, but constantly locating the power, the mystery of gifts of God in the community. And so in his particular letter to the Corinthians, he says, "Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you?" And the Greek in that particular passage is plural. I would like to just kind of move through these different levels of sanctuary. I think beginning with who we are in our bodies. I heard somebody, it was Krista Tippett, who was interviewing a psychologist just the other day, who they were conversing about his work has been done with people who have experienced a lot of trauma that we hold in our bodies. And it was interesting, he was talking about the role of yoga, actually. That was one of his antidotes to helping his patients release from body trauma. But he said, the Western culture is stunningly disembodied. I think we understand that, don't we? Particularly Western culture, that I would say particularly that which has been shaped by Great Britain and the church. So let's take the church's historic anti-body mentality. Body is the place of sin mentality. Sex is the place of sin mentality. And so those of us who are raised with some of those threads, and also probably a thread coming out of Victorian England, what's going on in your body? I don't know. So it's one big universe, isn't it? That's what we know, that our body is one great big universe, and we've kind of separated it. Well, this is my body, but this is what I think. Right? This is my body, but my heart is telling me this. We've separated it out, and I think the body is kind of the last to be brought into the circle of identity. And so the work that he does with people who have experienced trauma, particularly abuse as children, he says that those people who have experienced physical sexual abuse as children, or later in year, those who have come back from more PTSD, etc., once you experience that kind of that kind of trauma in your body is no longer a sanctuary for you. And because your body isn't a safe place for you, you actually don't think the world is a safe place. It's interesting, isn't it? That as soon as our body stops being safe for us, the whole universe stops being safe for us. So it goes to reinforce that until we come to terms again with this being our original sanctuary and reconnecting to body as original sanctuary, as vessel for all that is sacred, well, that's a big task in and of itself, isn't it? And it's interesting when you look at, for example, the sacred practice of indigenous peoples, right? So what did the Indian Act, among other things, destroy in the early 20th century? Confiscated all items involved in sacred practice within our indigenous peoples in Canada. Drumming and dancing forbidden. Forbidden. And I remember a year ago when we hosted the blanket ceremony, and we were all in a circle, and we'd had this experience of, in fact, what happened in our history. Most of us did not know exactly. And I remember thinking to myself, I remember kind of stamping my feet and going, you know, that culture that would throw away the drum and the dancing actually at some level was a culture of tyranny for us as well. Because it wasn't just them who weren't allowed to drum and dance. It was us who weren't allowed to drum and dance. It was us who were just, the body you were to be suspicious of the body, particularly women's bodies, I might add. So I'm just kind of trying to open up this larger conversation about how it is so important, and yet our tradition is incarnational. That's what we have to claim as a tradition. And yet we just fell so far from that tree when you look at how our tradition unfolded. So there's the first place we think about sanctuary. In our flesh. So the next piece then is community as sanctuary, right? It's like Paul said, you are the temple of the sacred. And so it's interesting, I'm going to just share with you some work from Brené Brown in her book, Strong Back, Soft Front, Wild Heart, where she suggests that this vision of belonging to one another is not just possible. We think, isn't that a wonderful dream? That we can actually belong to one another. And won't it be great when the whole world figures out that we are actually intended to belong to one another, especially after last week? But she says it's not just possible, it is true. It is in fact true. So that when we are not belonging to one another, we are in fact ripping up this sanctuary that is our deepest calling as community. So, what is it that our tradition has to contribute to this conversation? First and foremost, we are an incarnational tradition. I love that line by Wendell Berry that says, everything we need is here. So that means that we need to treat one another as sanctuary. We need to treat one another as sacred vessel. And then we need to be open to then experiencing the sacred within our own personal incarnational body, and then in the community with one another. So let me just continue to do a little bit more theology here. So if our first calling, and I go back and forth, I think you hear me going back and forth to ancient language, a little bit more contemporary language, but if our initial calling is to be imago Dei, all right, image of God. If we were made in the image of God, and not just us, it's not just human-centric, boy, was that a mistake, but the entire creation is a mirror image of God. And if God is sanctuary, then among our primary callings as individuals and as a community is to be sanctuary. The Sufis' understanding of the mystery that we call God is light. And they describe our entire purpose as a call to continually and consistently ensure that our own light is lit and aligned with the cosmic light. It's the same thing that Jesus was saying, right? And yet Jesus had to challenge the entire theological construct of his community in order to get them to take themselves seriously as God's sanctuary. And this was, I might add, in a theological and historical context where the temple was a place for doing business, a place for those people who had means, and it was a bit of a racket, really. And Jesus is saying, just calling them away from that liturgical tradition that had gone so down the wrong path, is saying, in you and in us together is that which is the mystery. Together we will be sanctuary. So if I take this just a little bit further in reflection, if the earth then is also a mirror of the body of God, and the earth is intended to be infused with that deep calling to be sanctuary, it is, we know that we are now in an era of fearing that the sanctuary, our home, this planet, is in big, big trouble. And I suspect that we are probably feeling it in our bodies more than we have ever felt it before. So talk about traumatic stress. The culture in which we are living, both as a result of the inferno in Australia, the inferno south of the border, the inferno that's been set off with this battling with superpowers. So I think that our task, our deepest calling, and what needs to be our spiritual discipline as well, is to cultivate a deep understanding of how we are sanctuary in and of ourselves. And the reason being is because I think there's probably a lot of fear in the air. I know I had to turn the radio off a couple of times this week. Almost took my breath away, almost couldn't breathe. But that's just not enough, is it? We can't just turn our radios off. We need to then go to that place where we connect with mystery and where we remember our deepest calling in a world that's got some stuff going on, to be light. So, up until now, I haven't said anything about this sanctuary, but I'm going to say a few words now. I think St. Andrew's has always, we are committed to knowing what time it is. And therefore, as a community of faith, we have taken some bold steps to move in a unique direction that we thought would be more in keeping with the culture in which we found ourselves, but also deeply, deeply restorative and deeply founded on the most foundational core values of this tradition: compassion, justice, inclusivity, hospitality, welcome. And so we have grounds that represent that deep vision. We have the back wall of the universe. We have a store. We have an after-school program. We have a prayer shawl ministry. We have a ministry to one another. We have a sharing. All of that come from the deepest roots of our tradition. And all of it, in actual fact, says sanctuary. We go to the table to find sanctuary. We connect with the creation to find sanctuary. We provide sanctuary for vulnerable girls. We partnership with artisans who need us to be sanctuary for them. It's been all about creating a safe, restorative place to be in right relationship with one another. So next Saturday, Doreen Balabanoff, who is the professor from Ontario School of Art and Design, will be joining us for a workshop to help us look at how we might transform this sanctuary to serve as a deepest destination of sanctuary for the world around us. And it's interesting, I was in an Anglican church in Toronto worshiping last week, and I introduced myself to the priest and got on like a house on fire. And I told her who I was, where I was, what I was doing, and she goes, "Oh, yeah, Lynn," she goes, "I got something from the diocese the other day that said that, by 2040, none of these churches will be left." And I said, "Oh, Cheryl, give me a break, 2030. I said, that number is way wrong. And she goes, "Yeah, I know it's way wrong." I said, "Cheryl, I think our only hope right now is to just jump off a cliff. We've just got to keep taking the big, bold steps." "Can I quote you on that?" I said, "Yeah, you can." So I'm not the one who throws around the facts and figures a great deal, but I think it's really important as we go into this conversation again that not only do we know what time it is, because we do know what time it is, we do, but I think it's more important to know what season is it for us as we continue to live more deeply into our calling to be sanctuary for one another and for the world around us. You know that the numbers tell us that we have about 5 years left. And the reason we even have 5 years left is because a really big gift came to us from a friend of this community who bestowed that gift on us because we were living for the world around us. That's what he said. "I'm giving you this money because of what you do in the community." I'm going to give you another statistic, just because I think it's really important that we look at all of these pieces. We are going to have a deficit last year, that's double from the one the year before. Why? Because we are now at the point in our congregation where we are beginning to lose members, or the circumstances of members is changing, and their contributions to us as a result have taken a deep dive. I suspect that if you looked at the people who are sitting beside right now, and we kind of started to do the math, we'd go, 5 years. How many of us will be here? So I'm telling you all of that not to frighten you. That has never, ever been my intention. I'm telling you that so that you will see that ultimately the direction that we are going has got to be bigger than us. Wherever we go with this sanctuary, it's got to be bigger than us. Because in 6 years, we may not even be here. So what we need to consider as we're moving into this workshop with Doreen is that we need to take that deep dive into the deepest identity that we have been given as a result of this tradition. And that is to be sanctuary. So that those people who walk through this building have this sense of being held in light and grace and wonder in a way that fortifies them and restores them to return to their lives. Any decision we make, simply, it would neither be wise nor would it be faithful for us to make it for the 30 people who are left in the building. So I'm not normally so bold with all of that from the pulpit, but I'll actually share a few words with Noble Dean as well, who is also a retired minister associated with this sanctuary, and he said, Jesus' temple is within. It is a matter of our heart. This is Jesus' temple. A call to love wholeheartedly and radically. Indeed, his ideas to consider ourselves as sanctuary were so threatening that the established order had him killed for it. Anyway, I invite you, as we move towards doing that work together with Doreen next week, to think deeply about that calling of ours to be sanctuary. And for all of our programs and our spaces to mirror that deep identity.